And then I came to the conclusion that I will accomplish a lot more in the next 18 months being a point person on the anti-Semitism file than I would sitting in the opposition benches and joining hundreds of other people yelling and screaming at the government.
That's the voice of Montreal Liberal MP Anthony Housefather, speaking here on the CJN Daily nearly 4 months ago. And he had just decided not to quit his own party after clashing with the Liberal stance on the Israel-Hamas war. You'll remember that we reported on this story and on the vote in the House of Commons in March when almost the entire Liberal caucus was prepared to vote to recognize Palestine unilaterally, but they eventually passed a watered-down motion. At the time, Housefather told us he'd decided to stay after much reflection and after a lengthy conversation with the Prime Minister, who promised to give him an important new job to help fight anti-Semitism in Canada. Housefather told us the job would be announced formally sometime before Passover. Well, it was 13 weeks without an announcement, although Housefather was admittedly hard at work on the anti-Semitism file anyway, but without a title or a budget or extra staff. On Friday, the announcement came down that Housefather is a special advisor to the PM and to Cabinet on relations with the Canadian Jewish community and on anti-Semitism. It's the first time in Canadian history that a member of Parliament has been given this title. He'll work with the current Canadian Special Envoy for Anti-Semitism and Holocaust Remembrance, Deborah Lyons, a sort of super anti-Semitism fighting tag team. But as Housefather puts it, he has easier access than she does to the corridors of power because he's a sitting MP in the government and also serving now as parliamentary secretary to the Treasury Board chair, while Lyons' job is supposed to be non-partisan. Some commentators have wondered about the announcement's timing, coming just after the Liberals recently lost a by-election in Toronto St. Paul's to the Conservatives. The riding has a big Jewish population. It also comes amidst the uproar over the newly named head of the Canadian Human Rights Commission, Birju Ditani, who seems to have an anti-Israel past. Housefather says there was no abnormal delay or dissension about his new role.
There's a lot of things that people can criticize the Prime Minister for. This is one that I've said from the beginning is a misplaced criticism in terms of his own personal views. He very much abhors anti-Semitism, and I think he'd like, this to be snapped out of existence, and I think he wants me to do a job.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Monday, July 8th, 2024. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News. With the announcement making Housefather a special advisor to the Prime Minister and Cabinet, he gets a budget to travel, an extra staff member to handle the file, and an official title. But no legal powers. However, Housefather says at least the title could help open more doors to him as he arranges meetings with cabinet ministers, with leaders from all levels of government and civil society, and Jewish Canadians. His top priorities will be figuring out legal ways to get rid of the pro-Palestinian encampments, especially at McGill University, but also across Canada, establishing legislation to create protest-free bubble zones around synagogues and other places of worship, and helping police figure out better ways to make criminal charges stick when someone's arrested for hate-motivated crimes. Housefather joins the CJN Daily now from Montreal to explain what he's working on and how he's handled the recent anti-Semitic attacks against him from outsiders, as well as criticism from within the Jewish community, too.
Thanks for having me, Ellen.
First of all, congratulations on the new appointment Friday afternoon.
Thanks. I look forward to trying to make a difference for the community.
When you and I spoke in early April, you were expecting an announcement imminently. What took so long?
Well, I've been working on a number of files, whether it's the IRGC file, whether it's bubble legislation files. This was just the Prime Minister making a formal announcement. But I've been working on on files related to the Jewish community, from the time that we discussed this. But it was nice to, I guess, have him recognize me in this way, and perhaps it will give me more ability to interact with universities, with municipalities, with police, with people at other levels of government, where I don't have legislative powers or anything other than moral suasion. But at least this will certainly help, and to help achieve actual goals, actual policy changes, actual actions, versus just condemning a lot of anti-Semitism, which everybody's condemning, but condemning doesn't really change much other than we know that people don't like it. We actually have to find ways, and many of the issues, as you know, are at the municipal level, at the universities, at the provincial level. But the Jewish community, I think today, is very frustrated, very unhappy, because no level of government in Canada and no government in the world has dealt with anti-Semitism to a level that we're satisfied with. And Jewish communities don't care, I think, what the Constitution says and that it's this level or that level. They just want somebody to do something. So my goal is to try to work with Deborah and Jewish community organizations to actually do something. And whereas at the federal level, I have a much easier time of actually making something happen, but that won't be enough, like bringing students back to school safely in September. And that's not something that federally we have any legislative ability to do, but we can encourage, we can come up with ideas, and we can push. And that's the goal.
What are you going to tell the Prime Minister that you don't already tell him about how the Jewish community is feeling?
Well, I think, again, this would give me more of an impactful way to not only talk to him and his staff and give him advice, which I do, yes, but to work across government with different ministers, whether it's the Minister of Public Safety, Dominic LeBlanc, whether it's the Minister of Justice, Arif Farani, whether it's Kamal Kara, whether it's other ministers that have issues. Even Lawrence Macaulay right now has the kosher slaughter issue that I've been working on. And so all of these things tie across different departments. And hopefully, with the new title also comes an added level of respect for the way I'll be weighing in on things.
What are you going to do differently that Deborah Lyons' office and herself isn't already supposed to be doing? She's the anti-Semitism czar, and now you're czar 2.0. Like how do you divide this up?
Well, again, I think we're going to be working together to define priorities and for me to help her when things are happening within the federal government. For example, I have more access to my colleagues than she does on a daily basis. I have the ability in Treasury Board to deal with policies, for example, having grants tied to accepting our anti-racism strategy, which includes the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, across all departments versus just having it right now in heritage. There are things that I think I can assist with from a different perspective as an elected official, but where we can work together, for example, to encourage budgets to be given for police training on hate crimes. That is something the federal government can do, right? We're not in charge, but we can help train police across the country. We can help train prosecutors.
The thing about that is, in Toronto, I know, police charge, and then most of the charges for hate crime or hate motivated or any they're literally withdrawn. They're dropped. What message does this send that you're just taking people out of the protest area, ruining their reputation, and then nothing happens?
Yes, I think the Minister of Public Safety and the Attorney General of Canada should be bringing together ministers of public safety and attorney generals from across Canada to have this discussion. Where does the criminal code need to be amended, for example, to better prosecute hate crimes? For those hate crimes that are currently being charged, what is causing them to be dropped? What can we do better? And then it's also an understanding, right, that hate crimes require evidence that makes it difficult for prosecutions. You have to show that the person intended to do the crime for hate. The real question for the Jewish community, because we get stuck on the hate crime thing, is I think we just want the people to be charged. If somebody assaults us, we want them to be charged with assault. I don't really care if it's charged as a hate crime. If somebody's vandalizing a Jewish building, I want them to be charged with vandalism. And a lot of times we feel that crimes that are occurring are not being charged. That to me is the bigger issue than whether it's a hate crime versus a non-hate crime, because hate crimes are a very high bar. And a lot of what's hateful is not a hate crime. I don't think we care what the title of the crime is, more than if somebody's committing a crime. If somebody is firebombing a building, whether it's done for hate or done not for hate, these people are criminals and they should be tried and they should be convicted and they should be in prison. That's the real question. What more does police forces need throughout this country to do that?
Speaking of justice, Birju Datani. We've covered it. Will you recall the House of Commons Committee Justice Committee and study why this person was appointed?
So recalling the committee now does nothing, because right now the question is Mr. Datani, as I understand it, can only be removed either by an act of parliament, meaning both the House and the Senate have to adopt legislation to remove him, or alternatively by Mr. Datani withdrawing. To me, the correct step is what I encouraged Justice to do. There needs to be an independent investigation by a trusted person, by the Jewish community and others. To me, that this should certainly be public. Conclusion, then the Justice Committee certainly could meet to question Mr. Datani. But I don't think at this point, the Justice Committee that doesn't have all of these facts, doesn't have all of this evidence, is in the right position. All that we get is we were going to be giving certain members of the Justice Committee clips to attack Mr. Datani, which I don't think is going to cause him to withdraw. An independent investigation is required to convince everybody across the board in Canada that it's not a witch hunt, that this is serious, and then we can act, and then maybe it's appropriate for the Justice Committee to meet. A lot of people are putting out very partisan things. The Conservative members of the committee cannot find one member of any other party, because all they need is either the Bloc Québécois member, the NDP member, or any Liberal member to agree with them it should be reconvened. And so far nobody has, because I think we all think there has to be an independent investigation. And then I'm happy to discuss a committee meeting, because there are three things that need to be reviewed to me. One, did Mr. Datani on his forms omit to disclose to the Government of Canada material information related to his past? Right? I know that on forms that I've filled out, there's a question, do you have anything in your past that could embarrass the Government of Canada, or that the Government of Canada should know, that would bear weight on your appointment? So the question is, did he omit material information on the forms? Number two, go through all the things he allegedly didn't do with social media to determine if communities would lack confidence in him based on that information. And then number three, how did all this get missed in the vetting process? That's an internal government question. Another thing, in addition to the question of Mr. Datani and whether he stays, goes, whatever, is what do we do to fix the process so that vetting is done better by all government departments? And that's a question for sure that the committee could weigh into.
I want to bring it back to the hateful poster that you were targeted in Montreal, if you don't mind. Did you personally go and see this sign after someone showed it to you? Do you know where exactly it was?
I do. It was in about a dozen places in both Outremont and the Mile End. So not in my riding. And I chose not to go onto the site to see it. I already went to my office when my office was vandalized and saw me, the posters all over about me being a baby killer and all this. And I see it all the time anyways, because literally you just have to go on social media. You just have to get the threats that I get every day in my office and on my email and social media and phone to my office that my staff gets. And I don't really need to see more. I already know, that there are people out there that hate me. The only reason I reacted publicly this time was because Federation CJA put it out on social media. And at that point, I wanted to make it very clear that nothing was going to stop me from speaking out and nothing was going to push me out of my country because of some hater. We should push back, we should speak out, and nothing should scare us out of being Canadian and in our country. And I just wanted to put that out because I didn't want anybody to think I was going to be cowed by this. Same is true of the cemetery where at my dad's, where my dad is buried and my grandparents are buried in Dollard. They put swastikas on the road next to my dad's. It's been a continuing pattern across the Western world, not just in Canada. Like what Canadian Jews, sometimes we're thinking this is only happening in Canada. It's worse in Canada than other places. It's not. It's the same in all the countries where we thought we were safe and at home and anti-Semitism was marginal. It's happening in the US, it's happening in Australia, it's happening in Europe, it's everywhere. And we need to fight back.
The timing of the announcement came after the posters against you and also after St. Paul riding by-election where the Liberals lost. Discuss.
Yeah, I can honestly say I don't. Like this was something, again, that was discussed, weeks before. It was going to be announced around this time. I don't think it was necessarily because of either. Although, again, of course, both are clear indications to the government that there's a problem where the Jewish community feels uneasy, where the Jewish community feels that we're not doing enough, where the Jewish community feels that all levels of government are not doing enough and feels unsafe. I had a very long conversation the other day with the Prime Minister about anti-Semitism, and he's certainly keenly aware of not only the threat of anti-Semitism, and particularly we talked about, Detani, the problems on campus. He's well aware. And again, I'm hoping, and I think he hopes, that we'll be able to make a difference. And he desperately wants to. I think we also have to remember the community is really frustrated, and a lot of it's personalized right now with the Prime Minister. Justin Trudeau grew up in Montreal. A lot of his friends are Jewish.
Right.
Really, this is not somebody who wants anti-Semitism to thrive in our country.
Okay, so back to what I asked at the beginning. When you and I spoke in early April, you were expecting an announcement imminently, and then 10 weeks went by, and there were internal divisions that were all over the news in the Liberal Party. How was that for you to see that story about there were dissension about people wanting your appointment to be announced?
I think that was one story in the CBC. There was one member of parliament quoted. I think what he said was unfortunate. But in the end result, obviously the Prime Minister didn't listen to him and appointed me.
We talked earlier about the hatred or the dissent that you received from non-Jewish communities attacking on you, obviously, with the posters.
But Jewish communities are attacking on me too.
Well, I was about to say, you've also had unpleasant interactions from the Canadian Jewish community since you decided to remain a part of the government. Right. What can you do, if anything, Anthony, in this new role to win back support from Jewish voters for the government, or does that not matter now?
For me, this is not a partisan issue. It never should have been a partisan issue. I've always said we need friends in both parties that could come to power and in all other parties. You always need strong Jewish voices in both the Liberal and Conservative parties, and hopefully in other parties too. I do not intend to take this job on as a partisan exercise. I intend to work with everybody. I'm sad, much more sad than when I get attacked by the pro-Palestinian side. I am much more sad when I'm attacked by members of our own community, and the social media posts have incited hatred against me that is horrible. And those people who do that, it's for them to live with. For me, I will work with anybody that wants to work in anti-Semitism with me, and I will try to show Canadian Jews that, the government cares deeply, and I know other parties care deeply, and I want to live in a situation where Canadian Jews do not feel compelled to vote because they're scared of anti-Semitism. We just saw what happened in the UK election. The Labour Party won a significant majority of votes of UK Jews. This is one election after Jeremy Corbyn, a notorious anti-Semite, was the leader of the Labour Party, and the Labour Party got 12% of the vote from Jews. And in this election, they won half the Jewish vote, approximately. And all of the majority Jewish seats shifted back to Labour, including Finchley and Golders Green, that has not gone Labour since Margaret Thatcher. So let's solve the problem of anti-Semitism so that you can free and clear not worry about that as you make your choices. Because the last thing we want is what's happening in France, where French Jews right now, which I think is horrible, right? There's a significant percentage of French Jews who now are going to vote for the National Front, a party that is tainted with all kinds of anti-Semitism, whose founder denied the Holocaust and has been charged in France with anti-Semitism, yet French Jews who have, somewhat forgotten all of the values.
They're holding their nose and they're voting, right?
And it's not the right solution. If I can make Canadian Jewish students, if I can make their parents and their grandparents feel 10% safer, 15% safer, 20% safer when they go back to campus, then I'll have achieved something. And I will never achieve that by myself. I'll have to work with all of you to do that. And that's the goal. We all have to work together as a community. And we all need to get other communities to join us in doing that, because we're not going to solve anti-Semitism as 1% of the population. We need allies from across all communities. And part of my job here is to sensitize non-Jews to the issue of anti-Semitism and make them allies.
This job that Deborah Lyons has, her order in council is October, whatever it is, 13th, 2023, for 2 years to 2025. The job you have coincides with the next election. Would you become interested in becoming the next anti-Semitism person to take over from her if she decides that that's it for her at the end of 2 years?
Well, I think to me, what I want to do is be the member of parliament from Mount Royal. There's no change in that. I want to be the member of parliament from Mount Royal. I think that my interests, Jewish community stuff has now come to the forefront right? Fighting for the English-speaking minority in Quebec, which is a much larger community of over 1 million people, and fighting for my vision of centrism, I think is best suited as a member of parliament. But right now, I know this is the biggest problem that faces our community, because if our community doesn't feel safe in Canada, then where are we?
Well, you mentioned making students feel safer going back to school in the fall. What are you going to do about McGill's encampment, which is now the longest lasting one in Canada? They seem to be immovable.
Well, so it's two things. It's a municipal responsibility with respect to policing. The province, both our public security minister and our minister of post-secondary education, have both made clear they think this encampment should be removed. McGill, for now almost 2 months, has asked the Montreal police to remove the encampment. And I, again, for the life of me, do not understand why the Montreal police are not doing this, why the mayor of Montreal is not calling for this to be done. I will do my best to exercise moral suasion on this. I had a meeting last week with Deep Saini, the president of McGill. He's very much overcome by the way that Jews on his campus feel unsafe. He would love to see the encampment removed.
I mean, maybe the U of T, it's civil law, so it's different, but maybe U of T's 90-page judgment would be something that Montreal...
So my understanding, and this is a very interesting question, is that the trespass rules, the law of trespass is different in Ontario than it is in Quebec, which gives tools to the police to deal with trespass in Ontario that Quebec currently doesn't have. So another discussion, of course, I will have is with my provincial counterpart, is to talk about the question of proposing trespass laws in Quebec to make them similar to what they have in Ontario that allowed for the encampment to be removed. But I still believe the police could remove the encampment. Again, I don't understand why the Montreal police is not doing it, and I'm hoping they're going to readjust their position.
Thank you, Anthony, for being again on the CJ. I think you're like our most popular guest of all. We've had you like 7 times in 3 years.
Happy to be here. Thank you so much.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily. Now, one important point I wanted to highlight. There's a new petition being circulated by Deputy Conservative leader Melissa Lantsman, which calls on Justin Trudeau to fire the incoming head of the Canadian Human Rights Commission. But Anthony Housefather said in our interview that doing this is not so simple. Well, I'm not a constitutional expert, but if you check the actual appointment notice on the web, it says that Birju Ditani was appointed by the Governor General on recommendation from the Minister of Justice, that he'll serve for 5 years, that he'll earn somewhere between $335,000 and $394,000 a year, and he holds office for good behavior, which means these kinds of appointees can only be removed for cause or at the discretion of the governor in council. Sources say if Ditani did disclose his background and his ties to anti-Israel protests and troubling research and lectures while he was a student in England, and then the government hired him anyway, then firing him now would cost taxpayers a pile of money. The CJN Daily is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman. Our executive producer is Michael Freeman, and our music is by Dov Beck-Levine. Thanks for listening to the CJN Daily.
Y'all remember that joke from Airplane? The old lady asked for some light reading.
How about this leaflet, famous Jewish sports legends?
But in actuality, that's changing. Jews are crushing it in sports around the world, and we are here to celebrate them.
Sandy Koufax gets his 10th strikeout.
Zach Hyman, his first career hat trick. 41 points for Diddy Avdia. It's Sue Bird's building.
I'm Gabe.
And I'm Jamie.
We love Jews and we love sports, but most of all, we love kvelling over Jews in sports.
Together we host Menschwarmers, the longest-running Jewish sports podcast in the world. Listen and subscribe at thecjn.ca and wherever you find your podcasts.